And now here is part 2 of the Mark Evanier interview.
I said, "Oh, I'm thinking of writing a book about. I don't know if you ever heard of him. There's this old band leader named Spike Jones." She said, "Oh, you mean Uncle Spike?" I said, "What do you mean, Uncle Spike?" She said, "Spike Jones is my uncle. Didn't you know that?"
Right.
I said,
It's never come up.
Her name was Christine Greco. Her aunt was Helen Greco, Spike's wife. Helen Greco had Americanized her name from Greco to Greco. I said to her, "You never told me," she said, "Yeah, I'm Spike Jones' niece. I even sung on some of his records. I'm part of the Spike Jones family." I said, "Where are all of Spike Jones' personal papers and effects?" She says, "They're in my garage. Your car's parked next to them."
You just had never brought up Spike Jones.
Wait, it gets weirder. I swear to you, this is an absolutely true story that nobody believes. All right, we go out to back to the garage. There's these boxes, these bankers' boxes full of stuff. I park next to them every time I was over there for the last 2-3 years. I take the lid off a box, and there's animation storyboard drawings. The boxes are full of Spike Jones sheet music and memorabilia and souvenirs and gifts he used to
Next to your car.
gifts he used to give to disc jockeys. I still have a lot of this stuff she gave me. But the box I opened was full of animation-style storyboards where Spike had hired cartoonists to draw gags that he would do live action on his TV show. He hired animators to do gags for live action. The top drawings on there at the time, I picked them up, and the top drawings were done by Tex Avery. Now, there were other gags in there. Some of them looked like they were done by Virgil Part, the great magazine cartoonist, and some of them I couldn't recognize who they were by.
Price was a good friend of my father's.
Okay, so she gives me these drawings. She says, "Here, they're yours, take them." Really? So the following Monday, I take them into my office at Hanna-Barbera. I was working for Hanna-Barbera at this time. I take them in to show them to my roommate, Tex Avery. I was sharing an office with Tex. He was sitting there with an old guy, I didn't know who it was, and Tex did a Tex Avery take when he saw these. And he said, "My God, 10 minutes, we were just talking about writing for Spike." And he remembered the gags, and he remembered, remember that? Yes. So I showed him the other drawings. I said, "Now, who did these other drawings?" The ones I couldn't identify. He said, "Oh, that's Roy Williams." Remember Roy Williams?
Yeah, Roy Williams, the big musketeer.
Right, yeah. Buried next to Earl Kress at the Forest Lawn Cemetery. Anyway. And I said, "Now, these drawings look like they were by Virgil Parch." And he turns to the man he was sitting with. He says, "Virgil, you recognize these?" It was Virgil Parch was sitting there. So, this is 15 levels of coincidence in this story.
That's right. Layer upon layer upon layer.
So, that's
so
basically...
you did write the Spike Jones book?
No, I ended up giving this stuff. I accumulated a lot of stuff, but I gave it to a fellow named Jordan Young who wrote the book. And you can order it on Amazon. He thanks me and he prints some of the drawings. But I just was too busy. And he was much more qualified to write it. I would have had to start from scratch on the research, but he was already deep into it, so I just gave him what I had.
The way you were with Marvel.
Yeah, that's right.
He was with Spike.
Yeah, that's right. So anyway.
Well, so how did you transition?
That's another Christine Greco story.
Somewhere in there you started writing animation. You went from comics,
well, what happened
you were doing
was
live action.
Then
it's cartoon land.
Well, what happened was that I was writing TVs. When Dennis and I parted company, we still had the same agents. Robinson Weintraub, a very big agency. And Stu Robinson, my agent, said, "Listen, I got other clients who need partners. Let me pair you up with somebody." So he paired me up with a lady named Marion Freeman, who had just split up with her partner. And Marion and I are still friends. In fact, she just called me on the way here. I talked to Marion. And we wrote a few sitcoms together. At one point, Stu said to us, "Hanna-Barbera is looking for 2 people to write a sitcom, a live-action sitcom pilot. Would you like to do it?" I said, "Sure." He said, "You'd have to work with Joe Barbera." I said, "Sure." He said, "It's about 3 young girls who live at the beach and wear string bikinis." I said, "I'm there. I'm convinced. I'll take it."
I'm there for you.
So we were hired by a man named Deke Hayward, who was the head of Hanna-Barbera live action. He was the head of all production at Hanna-Barbera at the time. Deke Hayward is the son of Andy Hayward, who I later worked for at Deke. And Deke Hayward hired us to write this pilot about 3 young girls who live at the beach. It was a sitcom for primetime access to run in syndicated slot.
Now we're about 1976,
This
right?
is 76 or 77, yeah. And I was already working at Hanna-Barbera. I was writing the comic. Chase Craig had retired and turned the comic book department over to me. So I was writing the
So
running the
you were in-
Hanna-Barbera comic book department.
You were in, now, do you have an office
I had
at
an office at
Hanna-Barbera?
Hanna-Barbera.
So you just
So I
kept
went.
the office
So I
and
went
started writing?
downstairs and met Marion, and we went in and talked to Deke Hayward, and we got hired to write this pilot. And that's how I met Joe Barbera. First time I met Joe Barbera, he comes into the meeting. Now, I was a huge Hanna-Barbera fan. I knew as much about Hanna-Barbera as I did about Marvel Comics. So being Joe Barbera was one of the big moments in my life. He comes into the meeting, throws himself down, he's exhausted. He says, I swear to you, this is another almost exact quote. He says, "Gosh, I got so much to do. My wife wants me to pick out some carpeting for her, and I've got to get my car fixed, and I've got to pick out some suit to wear for a party this weekend. And we just bought Marineland, and I went." Hanna-Barbera had just acquired the amusement park Marineland that I went to as a kid. How often do you meet someone who says, "Oh yeah, I just bought Marineland"?
Just bought,
And we sat there for half an hour talking about Marineland with Joe Barbera. When he found out that I had been to Marineland as a child, he kept quizzing me on, what was it like? Because Marineland had this problem that it was doing huge business on Saturday and Sunday, and it was dying the rest of the week, and whatever profits they made on Saturday and Sunday were eaten up by keeping the place open during the week. But they couldn't close it Monday through Friday, as he explained to me, because if you want the SEALs to do 6 shows on Saturday and 6 shows on Sunday, they have to do 6 shows on Monday and 6 shows on Tuesday.
They get out of practice.
And on Christmas Day, if it's raining, somebody has to go out there and put the SEALs through 6 shows of, to an
be
empty
a
park.
problem.
Yeah. So they were losing all this money keeping the place open. He quizzed me like the test market for Marineland.
you were like a one-person focus group.
Well, it was, yeah, that's right. And we ended up doing this show. People have said, that Joe Barbera is the greatest salesman they ever met in their life. This is true, probably. He's incredible at pitching shows and selling things. That he was charming. That he was, I witnessed firsthand Joe Barbera at his greatest moment auditioning women who had to take their clothes off. We auditioned 300 girls who had to
All come in string bikinis.
come wear string bikinis, and Joe, and every one of them wanted to marry Joe. They had thought him so charming, and we did this extremely bad sitcom pilot. The director rewrote us. The director had decided he was going to prove he was the
Auteur.
auteur, and after we wrote the script, he banned us from the set and rewrote half the script. But all this time, I kept saying to Joe Barbera, I want to write cartoons. I write the Scooby-Doo comic book. I know your characters. I know your characters better than anybody in this place. And we were sitting in a meeting, and somebody buzzed it, and they asked Joe what Wilma Flintstone's maiden name was. And Joe Barbera says, Wilma Flintstone's maiden name? And I went, Slaghoople. And he goes, how do you know that? I go, I know this stuff. And he couldn't. They went through periods at Hanna-Barbera where they would occasionally try to have live action writers come in, sitcom guys, when they did like Wait Till Your Father Gets Home, or
A trait that is with us even today.
they would every so often go through this period where they say, let's get these primetime writers in. And then the shows wouldn't work, as most of their shows didn't work no matter who was writing them.
Right.
And they'd say, no, animation, live action writers can't write animation. So then and I was in a period there where they had now say, well, live action writers can't write animation. So and since I came to him first as a live action writer, he kept saying,
You
no,
can't
guys,
write it.
Yeah,
You're the wrong thing.
yeah. And they wouldn't give me cartoon work.
Even though you're there with the comic books?
I'm writing the comic books, and they're taking plots out of the comic books I'm doing and using them on the TV show. But they wouldn't give me work on the cartoons. So in the meantime, Mary and I split up because she was going off to Europe for a couple of years to vacation. And my agent sent me out to Sid and Marty Krofft for a job, which I got, writing a thing called the Croft Superstar Hour,
Yeah.
which
Yeah,
was
yeah.
a Saturday morning show, a live action Saturday morning show for NBC, which I was the head writer on. And the producer of that was a woman named Bonnie Dorr. And Bonnie Dorr was friends with Joe Ruby and Ken Spears, who had started their own cartoon studio 2 blocks away, Ruby Spears.
Right.
And she sent me over there and said to Joe and Ken, have this guy write some cartoons for you. So that's how I started writing cartoons. I started writing for Ruby Spears.
And this is about 77, 78?
Yeah, in there. First one I wrote was an ABC weekend special called The Incredible Detectives. And then I wrote Plastic Man, and I wrote Thundar, and I wrote Rickety Rocket. I wrote a bunch of pilots for them. And I worked for Ruby Spears for a while. And then the people at ABC knew my work, and they suggested me to Joe Barbera.
And he's no longer pushing back?
And at this point, since I came with the network, approval, I started writing for Hanna-Barbera. And I ended up writing Richie Rich for...
Now, were you writing at the studio? Or were you writing...
I was writing
Because at some point you started writing everything at home, didn't you?
I always write at home. The variety shows for the Crofts, some of those were written in the studio. Stuff on live action show on staff, but cartoons I always wrote at home. I've never in my life been exclusive to any one job my entire career, any place. But I would have an office. I had an office at Hanna-Barbera where I was editing the comic books.
Yeah.
At one point, they tried to give me a separate office for starting Richie Rich, and I would say, no.
Just the office I've got.
I got an office. I don't need an office. And at one point, I had an office at Hanna-Barbera I never used. It was an empty typewriter office sitting there with a typewriter with my name, and I never went in there because I had an office. Here's another anecdote. We always like these things. I'm doing Richie Rich one season, and Jane Barbera comes to me, and she says, we're going to need your office. You're going to be finished on this date. Make sure you get everything out of your office and get out of there. And I said, okay, fine. I don't need to be there anymore. So I cleaned out my office, and I said, and she said to me, anything that's in their office after this date, we're throwing out. So if you want anything, you take it out of there. So I took everything I wanted out of the office. So they moved me out, and they moved Tex Avery and Chuck Couch in. Chuck was another old-time animation guy who worked there. And Chuck and I had roomed together. Tex and I had roomed together for a while, and Chuck and I had roomed together for a while. Then they'd been moved out. Now Chuck and Tex were being moved into my old office. So they were working in there, and one day Jane Barbera says, find out if Mark Evanier is still in his office. She says this is some assistant gopher runner. And he goes down, he peeks into the office, he looks at the directory, and the directory still has my name as that office. And she goes and he comes back and says, the office is still full of stuff. She says, throw it out. He says, I can't. He says, I can't throw this out. It looks like artwork. It's valuable stuff. She says, okay, tell you what, just box it up and call him and tell him he's got to get it. Well, I was in New York at that time. So they called my machine. They didn't get me. He comes back and says, he's not in. She says, okay, get his address, take it over and just leave it on his front steps. So the guy boxes up the entire contents of Tex Avery and Chuck Couch's office, ships it over, puts it on my front porch.
Jane was a little too efficient for her own good.
So Tex and Chuck come in one day and they go,
where did everything go?
And Chuck says to Tex, what happened? And Tex says, I think we've been fired. And for 2 days, they couldn't figure out where the stuff had gone. It was sitting on my porch. But, and finally they figured this out and came over and got it.
Before you came back from New York?
Before I came back from New York. And while they were
Well, then how did you find out about all this?
Well, while they were taking all the stuff off my porch, they also took my mail. They took this box of comic books that DC had shipped me, and they brought it back to Tex. And so I get this call one day from Tex saying, I've got a box here at the office that's for you, got your name on it. And I go, how did it get there? He says, I don't know. And I went over and opened the box, and it was like the current issues of Batman.
So how did you find out that it was Jane Barbera
I went through a
that did
round, we
all
finally
this?
figured this all out. I played detective in the hallway and put the story together. So they took my mail away.
Oh, that's incredible. And, okay, so you've got one office for once in a while, two at Hanna-Barbera, but mainly one.
Yeah.
And you don't use it much because you're mainly working
Because I
at
was
home.
working for Sid and Marty Krofft, or I was working at home, or I was working, for a while there I was working for Dick Clark. I did That's Incredible for 3 years in there, and I was working on That's Incredible. And here's something that goes to what we were talking about over lunch before we started this thing. at one point I was working for That's Incredible, and I was a writer on that show. I was story editing Richie Rich, and we had the same broadcast standards person on both shows.
Yeah.
So I'd make trade-offs. She'd say, I want to cut this joke out of Richie Rich, and I'd say, leave it and I'll let you cut this out of That's Incredible. I'd make
You had
deals.
leverage,
Yeah.
you had negotiating room.
And I was also working for DC Comics, I think I was doing Black Hawk for them at the time, or I was doing I was doing Gru with Sergio, I was doing a book called The DNA Agents for Eclipse. And I had a Dick Clark jacket for the Dick Clark Productions. I had a That's Incredible jacket for my That's Incredible job. I had a Hanna-Barbera jacket for my Hanna-Barbera job. And I would have them all in the car. And each time I went to a studio, I would wear the other place's jacket. I never wore the That's Incredible jacket or That's Incredible. I'd always wear the Hanna-Barbera jacket and rotate it, which was my way of telling everybody, treat me nice or I got another job.
I've got another
Yeah.
job, I don't need you.
Yeah. So I was working for all these people. I would work for
So-
Sid and Marty Krofft during that time, and then over lunch hour, I went over to Hanna-Barbera.
So you were two-thirds live action, one-third animation.
I was 1/3 comic book, 1/3 live action, 1/3 animation, probably.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I just did stuff for all, I just was going back.
Now, this
and
is
forth.
something that's been burning inside me.
Right.
How do you find time to do all this stuff simultaneously? What are your working methods?
You just do it. I'm serious, you just do it. You just sit down and say, okay, I've got to write this tonight, I'm going to write this. It's a job. I mean, you have to, first of all, you have to do what you enjoy doing. A lot of these things are things I would have done
For free.
for free.
Happily, people were paying you to
Well, you don't want to do them for free because that
undercut
then,
your
then,
price.
then they don't no then they don't treat you very well.
Right, of course.
If the script doesn't cost them anything,
They don't-
treat it
they don't
they
treasure
treat
it.
it accordingly. They feel they have nothing invested in it, so therefore they can throw it away or
Right.
have somebody else rewrite it. So frequently, the reason to demand money is so you get respect commensurate with the money. But people would come to me and say, "You want to write this TV show?" And I go, "Of course. That sounds like it'd be great to do." And I found that I got something from each of those things I didn't get from the others. From the TV shows, from the live action TV shows, I got to work with Sid Caesar and Jonathan Winters and Eve Arden and Gail Gordon and Roy Orbis. I mean, when you work for Sid and Marty Krofft, there's guest stars galore. I did one show for them. We had Richard Pryor, Willie Nelson, and John Ritter on one show together. I mean, this is a pretty
Pretty heavy-duty lineup.
yeah, and also I was meeting other people behind the scenes who I was fascinated with because I've always fascinated with show business, and so I kind of got into this business for the anecdotes. But and also on live action shows, I was writing music. I was writing special music material. I was hearing my material performed on stage. I was another great thing, by the way. Sid and Marty Krofft shows, a lot of female dancers, a lot of cute women with like legs. This was also a good thing, and I just had a lot of fun doing that. I didn't want to give that up.
Sure.
Then
Who would?
here is comic books, where I got to write stuff which, unlike the TV shows, I could just write it and they did it. And a TV show between you and the audience is hundreds of people. Other writers, producers, directors, people reinterpret, actors don't want to say this, the network gives notes. When the thing finally reaches the audience, you look at it and you go, yeah, there's one of my jokes, and that's kind of what I had in mind, and but you don't see yourself in it. I read a comic book, like I work on an issue of Gru, between me and the audience is 3 people, Sergio, me, and letterer and colorist, 4 people.
You don't have somebody giving you notes, changing
So
them.
good, bad, or indifferent, what you do comes out. And you look at I can look at a finished comic book and go, oh yeah, this is mine, I did this. And on the animation stuff, I got to work. First of all, I love cartoon voice actors. I started I never was happy when I got to start voice directing the cartoon shows I was writing because I had a little
Now,
more control.
how long did that take before? Because you were writing them, and there'd be somebody else.
I was
voice
writing
directing.
for Ruby Spears and Hanna-Barbera for a couple of years. And then one day in the early 80s, I did a primetime special for NBC called The Wacky Wall Walkers, which Buzz Potamkin's company
Right.
And I wrote it, and NBC was producing it in-house. And they came to me and they said, who would you like to have voice directed? Here's a list of the available people. There were some good voice directors around, but they were all under contract. I looked at the people who were available, and there was a terrible, terrible list.
You didn't like them.
Voice directing has usually not summoned good people. And at this point, most of the voice directors were failed, angry actors who were angry they weren't doing the voices. And I looked at this list and I said, I can't do a worse job than these people. And I said to the folks, I said, tell you what, you want to save some money? And at NBC, they love saving money, Conan O'Brien could still have the Tonight Show if he'd made them this offer. I said, if you'll let me cast this, hire the actors I want, you don't have to pay me to voice direct. And they said, you got it. So I said, all right, Dawes Butler, June Foray, Frank Welker, Bill Scott. I hired Bill Scott for his first non-J Ward voice job ever. And he hadn't worked in years. This is a guy who was the voice of Bullwinkle. Nobody ever thought of hiring this guy to do anything but J Ward cartoons. So I hired him. I hired Peter Cullen, Marvin Kaplan, Howie Moore. A rhesus monkey could have directed this show. It was how do you do a bad show with that cast? And I directed it, and it came out fine. And thereafter, some of the producers I worked for saw the wisdom of saying, oh, by the way, why don't you just direct it and save us? And I'd say, give me a little extra money as a writer. Don't pay me as voice director, just pay me more as a writer, and I'll do it.
So but now, of course, years later, you get paid as a voice director and as a writer.
The current Garfield show I'm doing is the first time I guess take that back. I was paid as a voice director a few times and other things. But usually I just was writing it, and I said, I'll throw that in.
You'll throw
I'll throw that in if you
voice
pay me enough,
direction in.
because I thought it was more important to add the money to my writer price than my voice
Now,
director price.
okay, here are the two questions that I have. How many, this sort of ties together, how many drafts of a given script do you usually do, or is it usually?
One.
You do one, and then you go through and tweak it a little bit, or you don't even do that?
It's changed since I got computers. When I was writing on paper in the Paleolithic era, I would write the script through, and then I would go in and do tweaking all through the whole thing. Now I tweak as I go along.
Right.
Because you can do that and still produce clean copy easier. And I write the stuff, and I just keep going back and going over it and jump around.
So you're probably
I
doing
sometimes write the end of the show before I write the beginning.
all in a couple of drafts, and
Yeah.
you keep going back and forth.
Yeah,
and
I
all
usually write most scripts. It works every way, but usually now what I do is I write the first third of the script, I write the last third of the script, and I write the middle third, because the middle third is where that can expand or contract. You've established the problem in the beginning, you've established the solution at the end. Now you've got a lot of screwing around and doing silly stuff in between.
How much you need.
Yeah, how much space have I got? Is Garfield going to, if the premise is Garfield has to break into someplace, I can have him break in on the second try or the fifth try. So,
Just depends on how many pages you need.
That's right, yeah. So, but I work every different way.
Now that ties into the other question, which is, so how many takes do you have in general? Obviously it varies.
Voice directing?
Yeah, in voice directing, you usually go through
Average?
it 2 or 3 or 4 times, and that's
The
about it.
average is about 1.1.
Really?
Yeah. My feeling is if you need a lot of second and third takes, you hire the wrong actors. I mean, I don't have no objection if an actor takes long, and we have a couple of actors who are older or have medical problems, and they take a number of takes, and we'll wait for them.
Right.
There's no bonus for doing it the first take, but we just happen to have good people, and there's an energy you get from the first take. So yeah, we usually.
So you're in and out of the studio rather quickly.
On the old Garfield show, we used to do a 7-minute Garfield cartoon in 15 minutes.
Wow.
We had guest voice actors would come in, and I'd say to them, "Okay, thank you," and they go, "What? You're done?" But I've got 2 hours on the meter outside. Thank you, we're done. I had an actor who came in one time, and we did the thing. And he leaves, kind of looks very strangely. I said, "Thank you very much, nice job, sign here, thank you." And 45 minutes later, his agent calls me. He says, "What was wrong with him?" I said, "Nothing." He says, "He told me you dumped him." He said, "You just had him do it once or twice and threw him out." He knew you were getting somebody else. I said, "No, we're not getting, put him on the phone." And I said, "We're using it. Honest to God, I swear to you, we're using your takes. They were fine."
He's not used to that.
Yeah. And he said to me, "I wish you'd asked me to do more, because when I leave, I'm unemployed." Well, I'm there, at least I'm working. I have a job.
Yeah, but you work. You gave us what we needed.
Yeah.
So you're the John Ford of
He actually
voice
said to me,
directing.
"Can I come back and just hang around the studio the rest of the day?" No, no, if you know what you want, you don't have to do multiple takes. And if you hire the right actors, you don't do multiple takes. I mean, we'll do them if we need them. Every once in a while, you hit a speed bump, and you have to do it 12 times. But you find diminishing returns.
Right.
The job of a voice director, I learned, the number one thing you have to do, I mean, you have to be organized to the point of saying, okay, you're playing this part, you're playing that part, you use this mic, you have to have, there's a traffic cop part of this
Right.
thing that even the bad guys could usually do.
Do you walk through the script or the boards before
No.
you have them do it? Or
I've never directed from a board in my life. We never had a board. I always write scripts before the boards. I would if they had them, but the timing never works out. But generally speaking, I write the script and I cast it as I kind of go along. I'll have a little notepad and I'll go, oh, and of course, certain actors can do multiple roles, and so I go. So now here's a scene for an announcer on TV, and I go, who got voice left? Okay, this guy has a voice left. Okay, that's a male announcer. It's a woman. I got a woman actress left. It's a female announcer. So that we write
So
for the number of voices we have.
Going in pretty much who you're
Yeah.
going to cast.
That's right. Yeah, and then then my job becomes, the most important part is creating the atmosphere that is conducive to doing good work for the actors. Let them feel that's fun, that they can improvise when they need to, that they know when they shouldn't improvise, that they feel that they have a good time, to keep the sessions fun. Every so often it's necessary for me to just stop and go in and tell dirty jokes for 10 minutes to get the mood right in the session, or whatever it is, because fun prints. If the actors are having fun, it will come across. And if they feel they're making a contribution, then that's when you get your best performances.
Yeah.
One of the problems that those bad voice directors had, I went to bad voice directing sessions. My very first cartoon I wrote, this thing I mentioned, The Incredible Detectives, this was an ABC weekend special, they let me cast it. They let me suggest the voice actors for it. I made a solicit suggestions, and they used most of them. I went to the recording session.
They had another voice director.
The voice director was a gentleman who'd been in the business for many years, who shall remain nameless. It was Alan Deinhardt. And very nice man, but he had a way of directing. Everything I thought sounded the same. And the actors would do the part the way they interpreted it, and Alan would correct them into a different reading. And it struck me, as I was listening to it, it's my first session, that they were reading it the way I wanted it, and he was correcting them to something wrong.
Right.
But I didn't say anything, because I thought, well, obviously there's a dynamic here I don't understand, because it's my first session, and a layman, we think this should be this way, but he's a professional, he's done this for years, he knows it should be that way. So I said nothing. So one of the people in the session was Frank Welker, and anybody who's watching this video knows who that is. And that night I called Frank and said, listen, I want to ask you something. It sounded to me like you did it right the first time, and Alan corrected you into the wrong reading each time. And he said, yeah, that's what most voice directors do these days. And what Alan was doing was he was having them read it the way he would have read it.
Right.
Which might have been fine if he'd been in the role. But he was having Frank.
But everybody comes out sounding like Frank.
In this case, Alan. They
Or
would
Alan.
They would sound like
the
Alan,
director.
yes. And everybody, and also, and this is quite a few of the cartoon studios of the 70s and 80s were run by former film editors. Joe Ruby and Ken Spears were former film editors.
Right,
Lee Gunther
right.
over at Marvel Productions was a former film editor. The Lou Scheimer, I think, had cut film at one point. Anyway, and voice directors were feeling generally judged by how well the speeches could all be cut apart, how well the editor's job would be in assembling the material later. Not is it funny, and not is there a pace in the acting,
Right.
but over whether the editor could do his job easily.
Right.
And Alan was directing the way he was supposed to direct, which I thought was the wrong way to direct.
Right.
He was putting an exclamation point at the end of everything. And characters would say things, and they wouldn't throw away things, they wouldn't mutter things under their breath. Everything was straightforward with an exclamation point at the end and a clean break. And if you watch the 70s, a lot of 70s cartoons, you hear something which drove me nuts for a long time. One of the ways to telescope exposition, you've got a talkie scene, and you want to get through it fast, you have information that needs to be communicated, it has to be communicated verbally,
Yeah.
is to have the characters interrupt each other. Don't make people finish sentences. Have one character say something, the other guy jumps in and goes, oh, and then so-and-so. And then because that way it makes the speeches shorter, the words are shorter, and it keeps the energy up. And you can write, if characters are interrupting each other, you can take, you can reduce the length of dialogue scene by 2/3.
Sure.
So I'd write stuff in Ruby Spears shows or Hanna-Barbera shows where the characters interrupted each other, and then there'd be a pause on the air. I'd watch the show on the air, and a character would say, and then I'm going to go to the pause, and somebody else, there would be a big pause, and someone would say, oh, the drugstore, right? And you'd go, no, those are supposed to overlap a little bit.
Right. Of course.
But overlapping is verboten because it makes the editor's life harder. When I started voice directing, we'd had actors come in, and I would tell them to overlap, or I'd tell them to step on each other's line. And a couple of them couldn't do it because they had gotten their hands slapped for doing it in the past. It was an actress we had in who done lots of shows, and I said, overlap that. And she goes, what? Yeah, overlap. When he's talking, you jump in and overlap him. You talk, and she goes, now wait a minute. You want me talking at the same time he's talking? I go, yes. And she goes, no, hold on, no. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You're really asking me to speak on top of his line, so we're both talking at the same time. I say, yes. Do you understand this? I want you to talk. And then we roll tape, and she still couldn't do it. Because all these
Too many years
she'd gotten
doing
scolded
it the
for
other
doing it the other
way.
way. And we had to order her to do this, and she had to break free of it. So
Did she manage to break free?
eventually, yeah, but it took 6 takes.
Yeah, well, that was the old thing at Disney. You know, actors always came in singly.
Yeah.
They recorded their lines and then they would just play with them.
Yeah.
And I always thought, that works up to a point,
Yeah,
but it doesn't.
I don't like doing that. I don't like, we have to do it
Well,
occasionally.
television, they do a lot more of multiple voice.
Yeah. But also, I think if you do people in splits, if they're recorded individually, you lose energy. You lose that feeding off each other. Because even if I'm reading the line as a setup to them, I'm going to be cut out, so there has to be a pause. And
Yeah, sure.
I'm not as good an actor as the person who's going to be reading, who, in other words, if it's Wally Wingert or Greg Berger or Bill Farmer or Stan Freberg, any of these great guys, your response, if they have the lead into line to you, you're going to do better if you're hearing them directly
Everybody's upping
there.
each other's game.
Everybody, yeah, and everybody's raising the bar.
Yeah, sure.
You know, the best way to learn acting in the world is to work with good actors. I had an old girlfriend who used to an actress. She used to go to auditions all the time for anything that she thought she could get into, where she was going to be reading opposite a star. She'd wait all day to read opposite Jack Klugman for an audition, even for a part she knew she wasn't going to get or didn't want to take, because she just felt that 10 minutes of reading with Jack Klugman was more educational than anything she could do as an actress.
Sure.
And she would
sure.
fight to get into plays with good actors and work and take losses to do that, because she felt the only way she learned was playing opposite good actors.
Oh, she's probably right.
And it applies in the recording studio.
Yeah.
And so on Garfield, we had Lorenzo Music for years, and he was wonderful at what he did, and he brought everybody up to his level, to his game. And then we have Frank Welker, and the same thing. Everybody has to come up, and I surround Frank with people who I think he's going to have fun
Now,
with.
how many was Garfield where you really got into voice directing in a major way, or
Mostly,
were you doing
yeah.
it before?
Yeah, actually, what happened with Garfield was I was hired to write the show, and Jim Davis was going to voice direct him, the creator of Garfield. And Jim likes voice direct. He directed the primetime specials, and he's good at it. And Jim happens to be one of those people who just values his time. And if you made that much per hour, you would too. And it got to the point where I was taking over for him. Just, we'd be recording stuff, and he'd suddenly, I got to make a phone call. Mark, why don't you take over here and you do the next scene? And then one time he couldn't come out, so I directed for a day, and then one day I was directing the show.
So you just sort of gradually worked your way into it.
Yeah, because when we needed guest stars, he didn't know the talent pool, so I would cast the guest stars. I was casting the show, when I wrote them, we say, oh, we need somebody to play the villain in this. I'll bring in this guy named Lenny Weinrib. I'll bring in this guy named Chuck
Okay.
McCann. And Jim would direct that, and then all of a sudden, I'd be directing. And I took over directing after the first half a season or so.
And
The
so
first-
you've
the
done all,
first
and
show.
there's been, how many half hours of Garfield have there been? And you've pretty much written all of them,
no,
haven't
well,
you?
I didn't write the primetime shows. Jim wrote the primetime shows. I started off with the Garfield and Friends Saturday morning show, and on that series, which was produced by Film Roman and Lee Mendelson, we did 121 half hours, and I wrote 121 half hours. My then girlfriend helped on some scripts, but I rewrote those a lot, and so basically I wrote the 121 half hours, and then we stopped doing that show.
And that was over, what, about 5 years, 4 years?
7 years, I think.
7 years?
7 years. It was tough because we started like a year or two before they went on, and it's hard to figure out. And we did, at one point we thought we were doing 2 separate seasons, and they aired them both as an hour. So it's almost impossible to figure out how many years. The show was on the air for 7 years. I think we did 8 years and 7 years or something like that.
Oh, I see.
And then,
Okay.
so that's 121 half hours there. The new Garfield show we're doing now, the day we are recording this interview, I am going home tonight to write the first show of the 4th season. The first 3 seasons each had 26 half hours in them. So you can do the math on that. And this
That's
season,
another 75, so you've written, or more than that, 3 times
78.
26 would be 78.
121 plus 78 done, completed, and we're starting now on another 26 or 27.
So you'll be up
shows.
well over 300 half hours.
That's a
by
hell of a
the
lot of lasagna jokes.
And you've written virtually all of them, right?
Well, there's other writers. The new show, part of it's written in France.
Oh, right, we were talking about that
Yeah,
earlier.
We discussed
So-
it over lunch, yeah.
But you've written a lion's share, we can certainly
Yes,
say that.
yeah.
And,
To my amazement, there's an interview with Jim on the internet. I'm writing the Garfield comic book now. And Jim in this interview, to my amazement, said, I think Mark's written more Garfield than I have. Which is probably true, but it's an amazing admission for anyone. He's a very secure man. I mean, he credits his assistants. For years, comic strip artists had guys ghosting for them, and they would maintain the fiction they did it all.
sure.
And Jim credits his assistants, he credits people who work for him, and has no problem with crediting me, because he owns the cat, and ultimately, it's his.
He's the
it's his
owner,
game. Well,
he's the owner, copyright holder.
but you know what the nice part of writing a show like that is? If you tomorrow, if you wrote a Bugs Bunny project, nobody has final say of Bugs Bunny anymore. I mean, at one point, Chuck Jones, by virtue of being Chuck Jones, his opinion carried more weight than anyone else's.
Right.
But if the question comes up like tomorrow, would Bugs Bunny, eat coleslaw or something like that? There's no person whose answer to that question is definitive.
There's no final authority.
There's no final authority, and there's no one person who says what's right for Bugs Bunny, or can even pick which guy is going to do the Mel Blanc impression this week with any authority. It's all subjective. It's the opinion of whoever has the job this week at Time Warner in that
Exactly.
division. But with Jim, it's one-stop shopping. I can call Jim up and I can say, would Garfield do this? He says no. That's the end of it.
Sure.
And frequently
How often do you do that?
frequently in any situation, a definitive answer is better than no answer or an answer that's subject to change next Thursday.
Right.
I call Jim, I email him or call him once every 10 weeks or 12 weeks with a question of some sort.
Most of them you can answer yourself.
Yeah, but it's like, actually, we've gotten into here's an example of this. In the newspaper strip and on the first Garfield show, John Arbuckle, and the owner of Garfield, lived in a one-story house. He's still in a one-story house in the newspaper strip. On the new show in France, it's a two-story house.
Really?
Yeah, the people in France thought it'd be fun to animate Garfield running up and down the stairs. It would make things more lively to have those stairs there. So they just put stairs in. And by the time Jim saw it, he went, oh, okay, leave it. It's like nobody's going to stop watching the show because it has two flights of stairs. So now we're doing the comics book. So the comic book is using a lot of the humor and supporting characters of the TV show, but it looks like the newspaper strip, and it's drawn by the same guys who draw the newspaper strip.
Sure.
So how many stories does John's house have in the comic book? So I punted this one over to Jim to decide.
And
Your
he just-
decision.
What did he decide?
He decided it's one story. In the comic book, it's one story. So, I mean,
And
those
it's
are
going to stay one story,
Yeah.
but he doesn't care what it is in the series.
But the point is, nobody's going to argue with me now. Jim said this. And that was one of our clouts on the network show, on the CBS show. I had the magic weapon of Jim Davis, which is that if the standards of practice people had said to me,
we don't,
we don't think you can do those lines, I'd say, oh, Jim Davis really wants that in.
And they'd back
And
right off.
yes, and I would lie. Actually, the standards of practice people were fine. They left us alone. The network left us alone.
Well, that's good.
We had, it was a very joyous time. You keep hearing these stories about standards of practice ruining shows, and they do at times. They didn't in our case. There was nothing we ever wanted to do in eight years of that show that standards of practice has stopped us from doing.
And that show's still probably running all over the world, right?
It's in some countries. I think it just went up on iTunes. They just put them up there. It's not syndication right now because I think there's no deal for it. The old one expired and they haven't gotten the terms they want. And the new show has kind of supplanted it.
Now, the new show is being done in multiple languages, right? They're doing it in English, and then they translate it into French.
We write it in English, I direct it in English, and then they have a French cast, and they translate it, and it goes into quite a few other languages too. I am told it's the most widely translated TV show in production today.
Wow.
We're even on in China.
Well, cats are universal.
Yeah. But I'll tell you, here's an example of the international market. On the old Garfield show, we had this segment called U.S. Acres, which was about a bunch of farm animals. And the leader was Orson the Pig, whose voice was done by a man named Greg Berger, who was also the voice of Odie, the dog, then and now. And when we finished Garfield and Friends, U.S. Acres went away. They're talking about bringing it back, but at the moment it's a defunct property. Now, the new Garfield show is a CGI show.
Right.
And one of the key differences is the old show, if I wanted to have a character walk in with do one line, somebody had to draw a model sheet and somebody had to draw them 3 times and it was done. It didn't cost a lot of money to have a new character coming in.
Right.
On the new show, if I want a character to come
Gotta
in,
rig 'em, you gotta model
they've got to
'em.
model them. It's thousands of dollars for every character. So they will always complain to me, you got too many characters. We actually now have our library of characters after 3 seasons is the largest library in the history of CGI.
Really?
We have like 800 models.
But they're done, so you got to stick
Yeah,
with
so-
the ones
so-
you've got,
But we
right?
still had new ones in all the time. Well, I did a couple of shows last season where I went out of my way to not use any new models. And I put a bunch of different, we did like 3 or 4 shows in a row and they didn't have to design any new characters. So then I went to them, I said, okay, guys, I have a joke I want to do. It will require building a new model for 1 line, and we'll never use it again. Please indulge me. I was real good. I didn't use any new models in the last 3.5 hours we did. Will you please let me throw away the money for 1 joke? And they said, okay, fine. So we had this episode where Garfield was on a farmyard. He was visiting John's brother's farm, and Garfield was miserable because there's no pizza delivery and there's no TV reception, and the roosters crow at 4 a.m., and he just hated being on the farm. And he's going on, he's giving this laundry list of, I hate this in the farm, I hate that in the farm, I hate this in the farm, I hate that in the farm. And I had Orson Pig walk in. Greg Berger was there because he was doing the voice anyway, and Orson Pig just says, hey, stop complaining, at least you still got a show. And he walks out. So they built the Orson Pig model, and we recorded this. Greg Berger thought it was his favorite line of the whole season to do. It got cut out of the episode.
For time? Or
No, the show's on in India.
Oh,
You can't have a talking pig in India. They will not let a talking pig be in this. If we weren't airing in India, it would be fine. But in India,
and that's a big market, so.
that's a big market, and they didn't want to have the show be different in some country. So they built the Orson Pig model, and they cut the line out for India.
So, that's incredible. When did Garfield started what, about the late 80s?
Oh,
88, 89? And
no,
then
I think a little earlier than that.
the
No,
middle 80s?
no, the Saturday morning show we started in. You mean the newspaper strip?
Well, the newspaper strip goes way back.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
when did they start? Because
I started doing the TV show in '85 or '86, and they had done 10 primetime specials by then.
and Jim Davis wrote all of those.
He wrote or co-wrote them all. He had other writers help him with a few of them, but he did those.
And the original ones were with Bill Melendez, and then it became Phil Roman.
Bill Melendez did the first one or two. Then Charles Schultz essentially said, "I don't want the guys working on the Charlie Brown specials to be doing the
I've
Peanuts."
heard that story because my
To be doing the
wife was
Garfield.
there at the
Yeah.
time.
So Phil Roman, who had been working for Bill Melendez, set up a separate company to produce
Right.
the Garfield
with Lee
shows.
Mendelsohn.
And that worked out okay for Phil. He did quite well.
He became a very wealthy man. Lost control of his company, but became a very wealthy man.
Well, okay, hey, you give me that kind of money, you can lose control. I'll lose control of my business.
Yeah, it'll be all right. And isn't Phil pretty much retired now?
He's got his own new company, I think. He's still out there trying to produce stuff.
I know that he had a company, Phil Roman.
Yeah, yeah. He's around. Yeah, we had one episode of U.S. Acres, the old show where one of the characters was playing a Roman soldier, and a giant, like a 20-foot giant, picks him up and he says, "Have you had your fill, Roman?" And nobody got it. Nobody in the entire country ever noticed that.
But you did.
Well, I put it in, but every so often you do one of these jokes and it just like rolls right over people's heads everywhere.
Yeah, because nobody thinks of Phil Roman, Phil Roman, Phil Roman, Phil Roman. Yeah, it's pretty strange. So you're back writing Garfields now. What other
My
animation?
career
are
has
you
really
doing?
gone full circle. I'm expecting to be back writing Scooby-Doo comic books any day now. Yeah.
So right now, you're principally doing comic books and animation.
And I'm writing some live action things that may or see, the nice part is the comic books all get printed, the animation all gets made, the live action stuff maybe a year or two from now they'll film some of it. I don't know.
So what's you've got 100% batting average with the comics and animation. What's your batting average with produced live action scripts?
The last 10 years, not good. The last 10, 15 years, close to zero.
But
I
you get
haven't written
paid
that
for
much.
it.
Yeah, you get paid for these things, yeah. But I haven't done that much live action the last year or two. I just haven't had the offers I've gotten in live action the last 10 or 15 years have all been give up everything else in your life and come and do this show, which I can't do.
Right.
I don't want to do that.
You don't want to be in a writer's
I
room
used to be
working
able-
until 2 in the morning.
5 in the morning. I mean, when I was doing, even when I was doing Welcome Back, Kotter, my life for 7 days a week was get up in the morning, take a shower, get dressed, go to the studio, stay there until 6 in the morning, go home, sleep, get up, or go up to Gabe Kaplan's house where we were writing the script. I had to actually go out at lunchtime and go to the J.C. Penney near the studio and buy shirts and socks and underwear to wear the next day because I didn't have time to go to the laundromat.
Yeah.
I didn't have time to take my laundry over to my mother's to do. I was working so hard.
Do you think that you guys could have done the show in more civilized hours and
Yes, oh, absolutely.
had it probably equally as good?
I think we could have done it better. Seriously, there's a problem with a situation comedy that you start rehearsals. We started rehearsals on Wednesdays and taped the following Tuesday. And on Wednesday, you have a great joke in the script. By Friday, everybody's sick of it in the rehearsals. So you take the great joke out and you replace it with something that's not as good, but at least it's new. And you just
And usually not as good as the original.
and you frequently find yourself then playing this game where you thought, oh, that's a good joke. I won't suggest that till next Monday because it'll never survive the week. But no, you're all of a sudden rewriting the stuff. You get punchy.
You can't do your best work when you're dragging around.
You lose touch with the reality because you're locked in this studio all day. You're locked. One of the things I learned to do in animation sessions is to go outside every 90 minutes or so. Just take a break, go outside and breathe real air.
Walk around.
There's no windows in the studio,
Yeah.
and just get connected again with the reality of where I am, and the time, and remember what time it is. And it was worse after as long as the hours on Kotter were. The variety shows for Sid and Marty Krofft, those were like,
Even longer?
oh, it was incredible. It was 7 days a week, nothing but that show.
If you were king of A, sitcoms, and B, live action variety shows, what kind of schedule would you concoct to do these things?
I do one a month. No, I would. It's the problem was
Too many cooks spoiling the broth, or?
too many cooks. But I think what it was, the problem was that, like for the variety shows, the big problem was the logistics, getting guest stars. There was always a catch-22. The guest stars wouldn't commit until they saw the good guest stars wouldn't commit until they saw the material, and it's tough to write good material when you don't know who your guest stars are.
Yeah, you
So-
don't know who you're writing
So
for.
literally, we would write a sketch. They'd come. Marty Crawford would run to my office and say, "I think Sherman Hemsley wants to do the show. Write a sketch for him." So we'd write a sketch for Sherman Hemsley, and we'd send it over, and we'd never hear anything because Sherman Hemsley suddenly got a play to do, and then they'd come in, he'd run in, and he'd say, "We think we can get Bernadette Peters. Write something for her." And I'd say, "Well," and we switched the Sherman Hemsley material around.
Probably won't work quite as well.
One time on the Pink Lady show, we wrote a they wanted us to get Buddy Ebsen, get something over Buddy Ebsen. So I think it was my idea. One of the writers we had an idea to do a roast. You know, they had the Dean Martin roast. Do a
Sure,
roast,
yeah.
a roast of Abraham Lincoln. And so we wrote, and we thought that Buddy Ebsen would make a good Abraham Lincoln. So we wrote this roast for Buddy Ebsen to play Abraham Lincoln, and we had one of our actors playing John Wilkes Booth, roasting him. You know. And before we even finished the sketch, they came in and said, "Oh, Buddy Ebsen's got another commitment. He's not available." And I said, "Oh, now we're going to do the sketch." They said, "But we think we can get Red Buttons."
He
And
wouldn't
I
be
went,
quite
so
the
I
same.
went, Red Buttons was John Wilkes Booth, ended up playing John Wilkes Booth. We had somebody else play Lincoln, and
Oh, okay,
and Red
that
Buttons
works.
played John Wilkes Booth.
Red wouldn't
and so
work
Jo-
as
so John
as
Wilkes Booth
Lincoln.
got up and didn't get a dinner. You know? But I mean, that's what you're dealing with, and you're dealing with the logistics of can you get the material written. Here's an example of like variety shows. We had a segment. This is also in the Pink Lady show. We needed a song. They wanted to do a magazine type thing where we sing a song and do a little sketch and sing another verse and do another sketch. It's a form that the Sonny and Cher show used with their vamp number. And our director on Pink Lady had directed Sonny and Cher and was trying to slavishly replicate a lot of things he knew worked on that show. We were stuck with this. So we came up with this thing. We needed a song about a magazine. You know, what's the latest in the magazine? What's going on? And our musical director was exhausted. He was working night and day, getting arrangements done. There was so much music to do. And I kept calling him saying, "When are you going to write the song, the magazine song?" And finally, the day before we had to have it, we were going to record it the next morning
Right.
with the orchestra and backup singers. He calls me at 7 o'clock that night and he says, "I don't have time to do this. Can you write it?" And I said, "I guess I could write the lyrics." He said, "No, can you write the music too?" Now, when I write lyrics a lot, and I usually will have a little song in my head that I write the lyrics to, but it's not a professional song. I'm a lyric writer. I'm not a musician. And I said, "Yeah, I can come up with a tune." He says, "Fine. Sing it into a tape recorder. I'll have a messenger pick it up in an hour. It's going to go to my arranger. Whatever you do, we're going to put on. I have no other choice. I can't do it." So I sat down, I wrote the lyrics, I came up with a tune for them, I sang it with my bad singing voice into a tape recorder. A messenger came, he took the cassette, goes off. I don't hear a word. The next morning at 10 a.m., I walk into the recording studio. Just as I walk in, a 20-piece orchestra hits, yet that, and they're playing this song that I sang into the tape
The
recorder
day before.
14
before.
hours earlier, and it sounds like a real song. Those are the moments you don't get writing comic books.
Those are you're
here's
up
an-
against it.
Here's another story. Dennis and I were writing on Cotter. There was an episode that was one of those episodes where we threw out completely the script the outside writer had written. And we wrote a brand new script that had no bearing, no resemblance to what he wrote at all, with the same name, and he got the credit.
Right.
And the writer was Gary Shandling. Okay? So there was a scene where Horshack was in the boxing ring fighting, and it was 4 o'clock in the morning, and we were sitting there punchy, writing this thing. Dennis and I had to rewrite the script, and change things. And we're in the fights. Here's the fight scene. We've got a boxing ring on there. And I turn to Dennis and I say, and I remember I'm really punchy. I said, you know what this scene needs? It needs cheerleaders. He said, cheerleaders? I said, yeah, let's put 4 girls in cheerleader suits in this thing. He says, fine. I was thinking that it would jazz up the scene, but I also was thinking of remember I mentioned my friend Christine, who was one of the extras on the show,
Giving her
a
work.
giving her a line to say. So I took less than 2 minutes, I wrote in, 4 girls in cheerleader suits are standing by there. Now, Horshack's catchphrase was, ooh, 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 he would say all the time. So I wrote, they all go, Horshack, we're with you. Rock 'em, sock 'em, ooh, ooh, ooh. Less than 2 minutes, I wrote that in. The next morning, I walk into the studio. There's Christine and 3 other girls in cheerleader suits. There's a choreographer who's been hired to stage it. I had just written a very expensive joke. It cost them, $5,000 to do this one joke. And they do the thing, and it stays in. It's in the show. 12 weeks later, I am working on the Battle of the Network Stars. Remember the Battle of the Network Stars?
I remember
things?
that. They did
We're
that for several
we're up
years.
at Pepperdine University with this event, which was the CBS team versus the NBC team versus the ABC. It was basically all an excuse to get Jaclyn Smith wet. The whole premise of the show, and to insult Howard Cosell. I got to insult Howard Cosell to his face. Gabe Kaplan is the head of the ABC team. He's the chairman of the ABC, captain of the ABC team. And Gabe and I are walking in front of the stands at Pepperdine. It was full of Pepperdine students who were there to see Jaclyn Smith get wet. And about 30 girls stand up in unison and they go, seeing Gabe, Carter, we're with you. Rock 'em, sock 'em, ooh, ooh, ooh. And we stop, Gabe and I stop, and he turns to me and he says, didn't you write that? And I said, yeah, where'd they hear it? And Gabe says to me, maybe they saw it on network television, you schmuck. And I went, oh yeah, I guess it was on TV,
Probably the week before or 4 weeks before.
Yeah, a couple weeks before. Anyway, they had, again,
Yeah, well,
this is not something that happens in comic books.
That's
It doesn't
right.
happen in animation.
They look at the comic, they close it, say, I like that, put it in their back pocket.
It doesn't,
That's as
it
far as
doesn't
it
come
goes.
into their living room the same way.
Yeah.
It isn't part of their lives.
It's a whole dynamic.
And although when I've done chalk talks at schools with kids, they're quoting lines to me from the Garfield show. They're also quoting to me, this is amazing, the first time I ever did this, I walk into this class, this is like I do this a lot, around 1977 or something like that, or 70s. I was still in the comic books at the time. I think I wasn't writing animation yet. I walked into this class in Santa Monica, and these kids, I'm going to teach them how to draw cartoons. They were all doing Jerry Colonna impressions. And I thought, Jerry? And what it was is they were doing Bugs Bunny doing Jerry Colonna. They saw the card, they didn't know who he was. Jerry Colonna was big in the 40s, and Bugs imitated him a few times in cartoons. And these kids are doing Jerry Colonna catchphrases because they learned them from Bugs Bunny cartoons made during World War II.
And that's how culture ebbs and flows.
They have no idea who they're doing,
but they enjoy it.
well, it has a life. It goes on.
So you really don't have you don't have a strong preference between live action, sitcoms, features, animation. Do you have a preference? If somebody came to you and said, Mark, you can only write in one of these 4 mediums, which would it be? Would you stick with animation, or would
The
you?
thing I would like to do is write for the stage, but
Really?
every time I've had a project offered, it hasn't gone the distance. I've been offered a couple of things that one that actually would have almost went to Broadway. That's kind of what I'd like to do, but I haven't had a chance to do that. It's not so much the media; it's the people I work with, and it's the how much difference can I make? It's I just want to write something and see it get done, resembling what I do.
You want to see it, yeah.
And it doesn't. I can get as much pride out of a comic book as I can out of a big TV show. I mean, it's what you have to do.
So it's the process
It's the
and the people you work with.
well, what it is the part I like is sitting at my keyboard and writing. And that's the same. I mean, it's the same with all those things. I get to sit at the keyboard for X number of hours and write. And then it's a question I mean, it's fun to write when you know it's going to come out. It's fun to write when you know it's going to be done by good people. I wrote a show with Bob Newhart one time, and that was very intimidating. But on the other hand, you'd much rather have Bob Newhart doing your material than some of the other people I've worked with.
Sure. You don't always get
I wrote
Newhart.
for the Bay City Rollers, and I worked with Sid Caesar, and I worked with, and then younger people who were just as wonderful in their own way.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a joy to write for Garfield because not only have we got Frank Welker and Greg Berger and Wally Wingard and Lorraine Newman and Julie Payne and Laura Summer and a wonderful cast. Stan Freeberg is on the show. June Foray is on the show. I'm so proud. June got her first Emmy nomination ever for the Garfield show. After all the years she's been doing that, she just got. I got to call her up and tell her.
Really? It was you?
She's never been nominated for anything over the years. It's the one honor that has eluded this wonderful woman after doing the job about as well as it could humanly be done. You can't be a better voice actress than June Foray by definition.
Yeah.
You can't do that job.
And
any
she's
better.
done it all over the years. I'm
And she did
surprised
not-
she's
and she had never
even
been up for an
gotten a
Emmy.
nomination.
So we had her on Garfield playing this witch named Mrs. Cauldron, this character who might be a witch. In fact, this season we had my favorite line of the season is I've got a scene where Garfield turns to Odie and says, "I think Mrs. Cauldron's a witch." And Odie kind of goes, "How do you think that?" And Garfield says, "It's her voice. She sounds like every witch I ever heard on a cartoon show." And someplace someone will get that. Figure out it's a
Somewhere
joke.
in
It's a
some
joke
corner
about
of
the
the
voice.
globe.
It's a joke about the voice person. But she had never been nominated for an Emmy, so we submitted her for this role. And a week ago, Tuesday or whenever it was, I was in the hospital all night with my mother. My mother is 90 and still younger than June. And
And not working as much.
that's right, yes. And I was there all night. I came home about 7 a.m. And before I went to bed, I thought, they're going to announce the Emmy nominations, daytime Emmy nominations, the next half hour. And I wasn't thinking that the show or I would get one because I never think that's going to happen. I thought we did make a little push for June. We did make a little, and it's not like, June can win any time in the future. She's 94.
Right.
And
She's not doing it another 30 years, probably.
So I just waited up to see. I just waited up, and then they came up on the internet, and I went, there it was. June got a nomination finally. I was almost crying. I was so happy.
And you got to call it.
Of course, having been up all night, I would have cried if you told me the tide was going out. So I thought to myself, it's 7:30 in the morning. Dare I call her at 7:30? Yeah, I'm going to call. I called her up.
Did you wake her?
No, she was getting ready to go to do a session as Granny on a Looney Tunes show. Okay, she's working. She's working at her age. And I said, June, I called to congratulate you on your Emmy nomination. And she said, and she didn't understand me at first. And she said, oh, Mark, I've never won an Emmy. Isn't that odd? All these years I've been doing that, I've never got nominated for an Emmy. I said, no, June, you're nominated for an Emmy. She says, well, I've never been, I hope someday I'm nominated for it. I said, no, June, you were nominated 15 minutes ago for an Emmy. You are an Emmy nominee, June. And I think I heard her do a cartwheel. She was so happy. And so,
Well, that's really
it's
great.
June Foray.
And that was a week ago?
That was a week and a half ago, like that, or 2 weeks ago.
I think that's a pretty good thing to end on. June Foray getting her first nomination.
Yeah, whether she wins or not, that's about as happy as I've been on anything I've done the last year or two.
Emoting your dialogue.
Well, I think if she gets the award, she's getting it for Rocky and the Flying Squirrel. They're just calling it Mrs. Cauldron for the sake of the statue.
For the collective work.
Yes.
For all of the things. Well, thank you, Mr. Evanier, for doing this. Is there anything you want to add before I turn all the machinery off?
Do you validate?
Yes, we do.
Oh, okay, good. All right, thank
In
you.
fact, we'll pay you in advance.